Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiL.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, episode 62, Distributing Fractional Cows. Hello and welcome back to This Week in Law. I'm Denise Howell, your host, coming to you from the TWiL not laundry room. Contrary to popular opinion, this is my actual office. Someday I'm going to go down and record in the laundry room just to show you guys the difference, and you're not going to like it. But what you are going to like is the show today. We've got a great panel of folks for you. With us today for the first time on TWiL is Mike Masnick of Tech Dirt. Hi, Mike. Great to have you on.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. And for the second time on TWiL, Cory Doctorow. Great to have you back, Cory.
Hi there, calling in from an undisclosed location in New York City at the end of my book tour. If I seem a little groggy, it's because I haven't slept in 3 weeks.
Oh, dear. Well, we hope not to put you to sleep during the show. So have a lot of exciting things to talk about and hopefully can keep you up for the next hour and a half and then let you get serious rest time because I know you've been going. I'm enjoying your book, by the way. It's wonderful, your new book.
Thank you very much. That's really kind of you.
Yeah, Cory's going around flogging For the Win, his latest young adult novel. And where do you go after this, Cory?
So I've got 4 days off, and then we do the very last stop of this leg of the tour, which is in Toronto. I'll be at the Merrill Collection on June the 4th in Toronto. And then I'll be back in the U.S. again at the end of June for the American Library Association. And I'm going to be doing something with New America Foundation and Copy Night in D.C. And then signing at a lefty bookstore called Red Emma's in Delaware somewhere.
Wonderful. Well, for folks who are interested in checking out the book, you can go to craphound.com/FTW, stands for the win, and all kinds of information on getting it in its various forms is right there for you. Also with us today, returning champion Evan Brown. Hi, Evan.
Well, hello there. Happy Friday. Thanks for having me back.
Great to have you back. So let's get right into it. Lots to talk about today. One thing we haven't followed up on yet that we've discussed in prior shows that I wanted to get into, particularly with Cory and Mike on the show, is sort of the latest in the Jason Chen saga and the warrant that was issued to come into his house and seize his computer equipment. The affidavits surrounding the warrants were unsealed, so that's sort of my basis for bringing it up again. But from an overall perspective, I wanted to get your guys' reaction to the fact that this happened and any sort of take that you have as online journalists on what this means for the security of your homes and your information. Cory, you live in England, in London. Exactly. Is there any concern that you have that this sort of thing could happen to you there?
Well, I'm not specifically worried about something we publish resulting in a warrant particularly. I'm kind of more generically worried about any warrant resulting in the seizure of my computer and all the other ancillary information on it that isn't related to the warrant. I kind of feel like it's because so much of my life is in my computer, the risks associated with having that computer seized are much greater than the risks that would be associated with, say, just some files being taken out of my office. You don't just get information related to an alleged offense, or in the UK there's all this crazy libel stuff and so on. You would end up getting everything from pictures of my kid in the bath to private correspondence with my lawyers to archival correspondence on cases that EFF's working on that are still active, and all this stuff that I really would not want to have become part of an evidentiary proceeding. So I routinely encrypt all of my drives and my thumb drives and so on. And my feeling is that what that does is gives me, it won't, obviously in the UK, now you can be compelled to give up your passwords. But I feel like it gives me a little breathing room between, waking up some technologically unsophisticated magistrate and getting him to write a crappy warrant and the disclosure, during which I can do things like call up the Electronic Frontier Foundation or in the UK, an organization like Liberty or some of the lawyers who work with the Open Rights Group, and to spend some time with them and get them kind of active on the issue and get a more sophisticated judge involved before that material goes into evidence.
Is there a shield law in the UK that would apply in this kind of situation? I'm
not sure if there is or not. I know that the situation of journalists is a lot more fraught in the UK. I actually joined the journalists union, the NUJ, the National Union of Journalists, because I called the Home Office for a quote once, and they asked me what my NUJ number was, and when I told them I didn't have one, they were like, well, why should we talk to you? And I was because I'm writing a column for The Guardian, and they were like, well, we don't know what your real credentials are if you haven't joined the NUJ. So I've got my little card, and the NUJ card is hilarious because it's a picture of you, and on the back it says, words to the effect of, "Dear Mr. Policeman, if this gentleman is taking pictures and it seems suspicious and you're thinking of arresting him under Section 44 of the Terrorism Act, which is the one that lets them arrest you for taking pictures in public places, please don't, because he's really a journalist. And here's a 24-hour hotline you can call to confirm that he's not taking pictures in order to plan some notional terrorist attack."
Wow, and the requirements to get that card were?
I just had to send some clips and a check.
Interesting. Well, here in California, and that is where you are too, Mike, is that correct?
Yep, I'm in Northern California.
Here in California, we do have a shield law, and an extension of the shield law that has iterated itself into the penal code, specifically dealing with the issuance of warrants like this, that prevents warrants for being issued for the obtaining of unpublished information obtained or prepared in gathering, receiving, or processing of information for communication to the public. And EFF has a very nice discussion on how there is no real exception to that portion of the penal code. It is separate and apart from the testimonial shield law privilege that prevents reporters from having to come into court and reveal their sources, that this actually, protects their stuff at home. And so there are some real questions about the validity of this warrant that issued for Mr. Chen. Mike, are you secure in the knowledge that this section is on the books, knowing that this warrant issued anyway? And have you taken any steps to rethink your home office setup?
It's a good question. The whole thing it is kind of scary. I mean, there are a lot of sort of open legal questions about what does this really mean, and should other bloggers or journalists or however you want to define it, should they be worried or should they be careful? I'm guessing that for most people like myself, it probably doesn't come into play that often, but it is still kind of scary that when you look at the details, it really seems like what happened to Jason was very much an intimidation ploy. I mean, there was no really good reason why they needed to issue that warrant in the first place, let alone take all of his computer equipment. I mean, basically everything that you could plug in that had some sort of computer chip in it, they walked off with it. And as Cory said, I mean, that's kind of scary, and who knows what you might have elsewhere or on your computers, and whether or not you encrypt it or what. The really scary thing is just that it comes off as an intimidation tactic. And as a reporter, that is going to at least will make some people think twice about how they report on certain subjects. I don't know, with the stuff I cover, I don't know that it's going to impact me that much, or that I would be that worried about someone coming in and taking my stuff. Also, well,
you certainly take shots at some rather large industries in your day-to-day writings.
Yeah, but I don't show off their prototype devices. But also, because I'm writing about the legal issues a lot, I'm also, pretty familiar with, my legal rights, and I know a lot of lawyers as well, and I certainly run stuff by lawyers pretty frequently. before I write about it. But I guess, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just sort of naive. That I'm not expecting the police to knock down my door at any point. But the fact that they did with Jason is definitely something that's worrying.
Evan, have you taken a look at any of the unsealed items underlying the warrant, and do you have any thoughts before we move on?
Just what a great story it makes. I mean, this was a real wild goose chase of sorts. The cops or the detective, going from place to place, finding the people. I forget their names. It's been a couple days since I've read all that. But the characters of all this. It was two guys essentially working together who had found the iPhone, and I guess one of them had taken off and was at his girlfriend's house or something like that. So I think some of the commentary pointed this out. It would make a really good. Well, if not a movie, certainly some kind of little, little short of quite an adventure here with the cops chasing this down. And really the thing that strikes me the most about this, not only with with what happened with the folks who are accused of actually taking the phone, and then also with Jason Chin, is just we fail to realize, I think, as outside observers in all of this, kind of doing our armchair commentary on all of this, how utterly horrifying it would be to really be the subject of this police activity. And to the extent that I sometimes find myself on the side of law enforcement in all of this, and I don't mean to sound like an anarchist. Now that I said that, it sounds like I was being an anarchist on this. But to the extent that I start drifting off into that side, saying, wow, this was the right thing to do for them to be clamping down and being thorough in their investigation, I quickly try to put myself in the position of being subject to this, and how utterly powerless that one must feel when you are the subject of these with people breaking down your doors, taking your stuff. That same part of the human spirit that was moved in the drafters of the Fourth Amendment to make sure that the reckless behavior of those in power don't act unreasonably when going about all this stuff. So a good story. That's my take on all of this stuff. A very captivating and thrilling tale of events, for sure.
Oh, well, what a wonderful segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is Cory's book and Cory's business model for his books, for lack of a better description. Here, Cory, if you haven't seen it yet, I have a free copy. I don't know if it's coming through. Oh, there it goes. It's flipping around. For the Win, that's on my iPad. Because you do make a lot of your works available for free. And you were on TWiT this last week. And I have a couple of things for us to talk about today that sort of follow up on the discussions you had there. And this is one of them. Somebody in the chat room during TWiT posted up a comment that said, I wonder, does Cory live in a commune or something? How does he get by in life giving away so much of his stuff for free? And I wondered if you could address the economics of free licensing and specifically how it's working for you and how you see it working going forward.
So without actually giving you my tax return,
yes.
there's some math you can do on your own. We sold 90,000 hardcovers of Little Brother in about a year and a half, and my royalty on them is about $2.25 each. So that was a lot of money. We also sold foreign rights into 17 countries, and we sold a film option to the guy who made Transformers, and he paid a bunch of money for that. And there have been a couple of theatrical adaptations, which frankly actually don't pay very much. It's the theater people have less money than poets, I think. But by and large, it's sold pretty well. I do this first and foremost because I think giving away free ebooks sells printed books. That if you have a mechanism whereby people come to love your work, what giving away the free edition does is gives them a tool that they can use to help other people discover why they should love your work too. Having worked as a bookseller and worked in libraries and spent a lot of time around books, I really firmly believe that the way that we come to books and that we buy books and that we go on buying from authors is when people hand us books and say, you've got to read this, it's going to change your life. And a lot of the people who might want to hand someone else a book don't live anywhere near that person in my world, right? They're all over the internet. They may have never even met each other. And I really feel like giving those people the tools to evangelize my work works really well, and provided that there are more people who treat the free ebook as an enticement to buy the physical object rather than as a substitute, I'm making more money. Ebook sales, we keep hearing about how ebook sales are doubling. And I think they did. I think they doubled in a pretty short period, and that's cool for all the people involved in ebooks. But let's be really realistic here that the ebook market, in order for it to double in most cases for most books, it just has to sell a few more copies, because there are virtually no ebook sales. That as a fraction of the overall trade book publishing world, it's a really, really, really tiny business. My editor, Patrick Nielsen Hayden, he calls it the venture with the worst ratio of hours in meetings to dollars in revenue of anything publishing has ever done. So, I can lock up the ebooks and cost myself all the sales that they would generate in order to maximize, the number of the small number of customers who come and buy books from me, or I can unlock my ebooks and let them spread around on the internet and maximize the income I get from that word of mouth. There is one other consideration that's really important here, which is that as a technologist, I really think that it's implausible that you would be able to exclude people who didn't want to pay from the ebook from getting it for free. I mean, there are people, I guess, who believe that you can use DRM to stop ebooks from being converted into open ebooks or freely copyable ebooks. And to those people, I say, behold the typist. We solved the problem of turning restricted or not very fluid, like paper books, into very open and fluid digital books, before we had computers, right? Around the time we invented typewriters. So rekeying a book just turns out not to be that big a challenge, and scanning it's even easier. So I guess, there's two responses to that. One is to kind of stamp your whittle foot in frustration and demand that the world rearrange itself to your convenience, and maybe even try to break the internet with crazy laws that like King Canute trying to hold back the tide. And the other one is to figure out how to make a lot of money from it. And I'm an entrepreneur. I've started a couple of successful businesses, and my writing career is one of them, and I want to make as much money as I can. And so the way for me to do that is to let people share my books for free.
Right. We have a link in the show notes to a talk by the director of the USPTO, one Mr. Kapos, who has a quote in there that says, "IP is fast becoming the world's currency of innovation." And I read that, and something about it, well, lots of things about it struck me as not quite right on. And from what you're saying, Cory, I'm thinking that it's not so much the IP, but the distribution of the IP that is the world's currency of innovation today, and that you're addressing that.
So what I think? I think that we, in the old techno-futurist days, sort of an early McLuhan, late Toffler, or rather late McLuhan, early Toffler, we had this moment where people looked at IT and its potential, and they said, we're about to have an information economy. But no one really knows what an information economy is, right? It didn't exist yet. And so they did what a lot of people do when you get a neologism, is they kind of concretized it. So they said, okay, an economy is something in which you buy and sell stuff. An information economy would be something in which you buy and sell information. And the more IT we have, the more we'll be able to buy and sell information. The thing about information is that the more IT you have, the harder it is to exclude people who don't pay, right? The more computers there are, the more networks there are, the faster they are, the faster hard drives are, the more people there are who know how to sit down at their keyboard and type, HurtLock or BitTorrent into it. All of those things conspire to make it harder and harder to exclude people from information. And so it's kind of implausible that you would have an information revolution that would put IT into the hands of everyone and distribute IT expertise more widely than it had ever been distributed before, and that the main kind of motif of that economy would then be excluding people from information so that you could sell it to them if rather than them getting it for free. I just don't think that was a very good prediction. On the other hand, the thing that we do see technology doing is radically lowering the costs of doing everything else. We think of Walmart as being a company whose primary expertise is filling shipping containers with Happy Meal toys and firing them from the port of Shenzhen to the port of Los Angeles at the rate of one per second. And that's not really what they do, right? Really what they do is they do IT, and that IT happens to be devoted to the task of getting Happy Meal toys into the hands of Americans. But without IT, there is no Walmart. We may move beyond Happy Meals, but Walmart will still have all that stuff, all that logistical stuff that they do with technology. In the same way that McDonald's really isn't a hamburger company, McDonald's is an IT company that just happens to use it to distribute, fractional cows. So. We have lots of businesses that are realizing amazing efficiencies as a consequence of the information economy. One of the ones that I'm involved with, Boing Boing, is probably a good example of this. We turn over a really good amount of money every year. We didn't even have our first face-to-face meeting. I mean, not just like a formal business meeting. We hadn't ever been in the same room together until we'd been in business for 6 years. We have about one face-to-face meeting a year now. We have 3 phone calls a year. We have kind of 2.5 employees at this point. We have a readership that's comparable to a magazine maybe like Wired. Now, we turn over a lot less money than Wired, but we also don't have a giant office on 3rd Street in San Francisco that Wired has. Every now and again I'll get an email from like a PR person who hasn't gotten the memo, I suppose, who'll say like, I'm looking for your main switchboard number. Could you pass that on to me? And I get these emails and I'm like, that's so wrong. It's not even in the ballpark of wrong. It's like infra wrong. Its wrongness cannot be detected by unaided human apparatus. And so that's what I feel the information economy is grounded in. And the problem is that this technologically bankrupt idea that we'll somehow figure out how to make computers that are worse at copying, while it's not going to actually create a world in which exclusion becomes easier, it will create a world in which the task of providing these IT-based efficiencies becomes more fraught, where starting a business like YouTube becomes more expensive because Viacom thinks that you should have an attorney at $500 an hour vet 29 hours of video per minute, and so that stands in the way of economic growth and new efficiencies and so on. All that stuff that you'd think the U.S. Trade Rep would want to have us develop.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Oh, and I should clarify, I got a question from our engineer as to what is IT, information technology, I assume you are referring to, but just
That's
for the benefit of any
Sorry,
of
I'm talking like a UN wonk. Next I'll be calling it ICT, information and communications technology. And then I'll start talking about FLOSS, free Libre open source software.
Yes, exactly. We have a show by that name on this network. And now I know what it refers to. Thank you so much.
I thought that was the dentistry channel.
That's
yes,
right.
Exactly. So what comes to mind as I'm listening to all this and thinking about the model of publishing in particular and free books in one form or another is as we move more toward a world where paper is irrelevant. My 6-year-old is spending a lot of time learning how to write. Handwriting these days, write letters out in longhand and put them on paper. And I'm always amazed at how much emphasis there is in today's day and age on paper in the classroom and how it continues to persist. And I'm sure it will for some time and maybe forever. But in the publishing industry, it's becoming less and less relevant. So my question is, as we move away from the paper copies of books that are the end result of giving away the free digital copies that you do now, Cory, do you see a problem with that, or do you think that other ways to monetize, such as monetizing typos, as you mentioned on Twit, will present themselves along the way?
So I'm not yet sold that paper is becoming less relevant to publishing. I mean, one of the things that IT has done is it's made it possible for a lot more people to put things between covers and get them into more people's hands, whether that's big publishers who are now doing what essentially amounts to print on demand, the stuff that we used to think would be the realm of vanity publishers, but actually being done to do short run or to bring books, to do sort of just-in-time reprinting in small runs that save money on warehousing and make it overall a lot cheaper to sell books, or whether that's real print on demand houses like Lulu and so on. It seems to me like we're actually publishing more physical books than ever, and we're aided by another great IT system, which is the digital bookstore. I worked in a bookstore for many years. I worked in several of them, and we'd have kind of on a good day we'd have like 8,000, 10,000 SKUs. That's just a fraction of the SKUs that you can get on a mid-sized or large electronic bookstore. So it seems to me like whatever IT is taking away from physical books, it's giving a whole lot back to physical books too. I don't know which one of those things is happening faster, but it sure feels to me like there's a lot of book-like stuff happening. In terms of the question of like where the medium goes, my kind of overall theory of what happens to media in the face of new technology is that when you don't have a technology, all the stories that are best suited to the media, to a kind of class of media, end up agglomerating to one unit. This is very abstract. Let me make it more concrete. When you don't have films, anything that works well as a staged event has to be on a stage because you don't have films. So films come along and they delaminate all the stories that in fact didn't belong on the stage, but we had to shoehorn them there because that was the only live performance we had. They delaminate them from the stage and they put them on the silver screen. And then the television comes along and it delaminates all the stories that didn't need to be 90 minutes long on a giant screen and work better at 22-minute lengths on a little screen in your living room, and it moves them there. And so there's all these stories lurking in potentia, all these stories that were non-optimally told because there wasn't the right medium for them yet. And then, YouTube comes along and it turns out that there are a bunch of other stories that were only like 8 minutes long or 6 minutes long and that only needed, 240 by 120 or 320 by 240 screens to tell their stories. And they kind of ripped themselves out of television or emerged from the substrate, where they had been lurking, waiting for something new to come along. So I don't worry over much about books going to tablets. I'm more interested in what the sui generis tablet storytelling looks like. It may be that book publishing ends up being like theater, which is to say it's the kind of far less economically important little cousin of film. But theater is actually bigger than it's ever been before because film expanded the audience for stage productions where people act out or dramatize a story so much that there's now kind of more theaters than ever. They just tell very, very theatrical stories and not very, very cinematic stories. And I think probably something like that will happen with books. I think long-form novels are very, very poorly suited to being read off of a general-purpose computer attached to a network. Because to read a long-form novel or to do anything that requires that kind of concentration means that you can't alt-tab to your browser and discover whether or not someone has put a lemon in his nose on YouTube, because then you lose the flow. And I can't do anything for more than like 7 minutes in front of my computer without alt-tabbing to YouTube and looking for a lemon in someone's nose. So I really feel like that's not my risk. My risk or my opportunity, such as it is coming from digital devices, either arises from single-purpose digital devices, which are necessarily going to be really expensive because you can only sell them to do one thing, and only people who are super-duper ultra readers, which is it's a small part of the total potential market for books, are ever going to buy single-purpose expensive reader devices and carry them around with them all the time. Or you end up making multi-purpose devices like the iPad, in which case you just have the lemon in the nose problem again as soon as they add multitasking to the iPad, which they're probably going to have to do. I'm more interested in what emerges.
You've got it already, even without it. I'm constantly just closing one application and looking for lemons and noses.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm more interested in what happens when we get the when we actually get sui generis tablet style, hypertextual style storytelling. I don't have any ideas for making it. I'm a novelist. I'm going to write novels. Maybe I'll have an idea for it. Neil Stephenson's just announced this thing, the Mongolia, that looks like it might be more sui generis to an interactive medium. And it doesn't involve a lot of long-form narrative. It's a lot of short narratives and meta-narrative material videos and so on. And it invites audience participation. And it's got a Wikipedia-style concordance that audiences can contribute to. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know anyone's figured out how to make any money off of it yet, but it's at least very interesting. I think that... that's probably enough on that rant.
Okay. Mike, you write a lot about free as an economic model. I was just hunting around on TechDirt for any sort of licensing language, and I don't see it there. Do you use Creative Commons or any other form of licensing? Of course, your site itself is free.
The site is free, and actually everything that's on the site is public domain. We actually don't technically use Creative Commons. Mm-hmm. we've actually looked at, I guess they have the CC0 license now, and we may do something with that eventually. But for now, I mean, we've basically just declared everything to be in the public domain. Anyone's free to do anything they want with it. And which we still actually get people contacting us all the time and saying, can I use this? I actually got an email this morning saying, can I link to something on TechDirt? Which always makes me laugh because, I mean, come on. Of course you can link to it. But yeah, I mean, people are free to do whatever they want with it. If they want to take it and repost it, and lots of people do, that's totally cool by us. We figured, early on we didn't even want to get into the details of, the different Creative Commons licenses that were out there. We just said, look, everything here is public domain. Take it, do what you want with it.
So I think that answers my next question, was if you've ever gone after folks who run spam blogs that wholesale copy your material and put them up next to AdSense or other forms of revenue generation. Is that something you've ever tried to squash or no?
No, I mean, we've never. What happens is, honestly, and I've written about this a few times, is that there are a bunch. If you look, you can find tons of blogs that just copy our stuff and throw up some AdSense. And the fact is, who cares? I mean, honestly, there's, nobody visits those blogs. There's no reason to. People visit TechDirt because, well, they like the content, but also we have a very large community of people who are very active and who talk, and, myself and other writers on the site take part in the comments, and you don't get that. Actually, someone did just point out a copycat blog last week that actually copies all the comments from TechDirt too, which is kind of amusing. But it's not the same thing. And if you look, those sites don't get any traffic. Nobody visits them. There's no reason to. If anyone does visit them for any, length of time, they're going to realize that this is not the originating blog, that it's actually coming from somewhere else. And hopefully they'll come and they'll, stick around on TechDirt and say, well, why would I go to the copy? I'll go to the original, and I can get the information faster, and I can get it, and if I comment, the people who are actually in the community will see it and take part. And so we figure, most of those blogs get no traffic. They do no damage to us at all. If they can actually figure out a way to make money, from my content, fantastic, good for them. Maybe I can learn something from them that we can use, and then use it ourselves to help us make some more money as well. That'd be cool. But for people who just want to copy our stuff and do what they want with it, we haven't seen any problem with that.
Mike, what you're saying there is really insightful, and clearly that's one of the big ideas that I think of when I think of the whole thing that TechDirt is, and it really has a lot of applicability, not just in the copyright context of what we're talking about here, but in enterprise-wide views of ownership and how protective of intellectual property and this quality that underlies that intellectual property. What kind of perspective to take on that? Anybody who's been following my Twitter feed for the last couple weeks know that I've really been a big supporter. I'm reading Jason Fried's book Rework, from here in Chicago on 37 Signals, and one of the things that he talks about in that book is this notion of not copying other people's stuff. And the reason that he says that is there's really no reason for that, because you're going to be found out. You're going to be pretty quickly called a phony. And I love the metaphor or the idiom that he uses is, if you're going to copy someone, you're just essentially taking the top layer off of the stuff, and there's nothing underlying that to give it any substance or depth or quality or breadth. And it seems to me like that notion is a lot like of what you're talking about, Mike. Nobody's going to go to those spam blog sites. It's obviously going to be phony, and in the end, it would seem that, I don't know if it's market forces or just a very kind of a priori perception of what quality is when it comes to content, that's going to make that stuff that has been copied just fall off the wayside and become irrelevant without the effect, or I guess the constraining or mandatory effect or impetus of copyright protection.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, it's there's this famous concept of cargo cults, right? And this idea that there are these South Pacific islands that during World War II had army bases were set up by whichever side was took over that particular South Pacific island, and they would set up a runway, and planes would come in with all sorts of supplies, and the war went on, and the war ended, and all the foreigners left, and the people who were left on the island said, well, we still want the goods and services that were coming in from the airport. So what they did was they just mimicked what the airport looked like, and they would have people stand there, in the tower with, and put fake headphones on, and have the whatever the lights to wave, or they would just use sticks to kind of guide non-existent airplanes, and think like, well, we've set up everything, we've done everything that had airplanes and goods coming here before, they should come as well. And that's and to some extent, you see that all the time. Whenever people are talking about, copying, that happens with, whether it's just taking the content from the site, or from, a business, or even, product ideas. Companies come along and they just copy, and they don't understand that deeper issue of sort of what works, or why something is interesting to people. And so they can make a copy, and the copy is meaningless. And there's actually a really good example of this, outside of the technology space, but it certainly applies, which was the famous NUMMI car plant, which was a joint venture between Toyota and GM to actually build good cars. And it was, GM's idea was, they were going to learn from the Japanese, how do we build quality cars? And it worked really well for NUMMI. And part of that was that they actually took, these guys from GM and sent them to Japan, and had them work in the factories in Japan for a while, and actually understand what was going on. But there was just a great This American Life story that they went in and sort of found out how come NUMMI didn't change GM. NUMMI itself as a plant was pretty successful, though it just shut down, and I guess they just announced that Tesla and Toyota are taking it over. But every time GM tried to copy what was successful about NUMMI, they just copied the sort of superficial aspect of it. And there was one case where another plant owner said, well, NUMMI's great. Someone go into NUMMI and copy every square inch of how NUMMI is set up. And it was, entirely superficial. It's just, well, okay, they set things up this way, but it had nothing about the actual, management philosophy, or the actual process, or the actual understanding of, why is there more quality? Why do the employees actually care about the quality of the product? And so all those other plants that just copied it failed. And it's the same sort of thing when people get so worried about copying, is that, they don't understand that it's not so easy to copy, what makes something really powerful, and what makes something really useful, and that what makes something that people want to support or want to take part of. And I mean, Cory is talking about, how the free ebook version gets people to buy the physical book, but it also gets people just interested in Cory himself and all the other stuff that he works on, because there's an authenticity there. And, I could go out and take Cory's book and start selling it. I'm pretty sure that the license you have right now would let me go out and sell it. And,
nope.
Maybe it doesn't?
Only give it away.
Okay. No, okay.
Yeah.
And share alike.
Okay.
But you can charge people admission to come into the door and get the copies of it, right? Just kind of like, you're providing that ancillary service to the distribution of this free book. Let's use that as your hypothetical.
Sure. So, I mean, and there are some people who have actually let other people sell stuff. And, technically the same is true of TechDirt. If someone wanted to take it and try and sell it, sell the content, put it into a book and sell it, more power to you. I mean, I might learn something from that. But, the idea is that in giving away that book and doing everything that Cory does, he's really built up this loyal following that is very interested in him and the authenticity of him, and so they're willing to support him and do that. So if you did allow it, or if there was a situation in which I could do it, people wouldn't do that, because why? There's no authenticity in me. I guess if I charge people to come hear a reading of it or whatever, and it's me reading it, nobody's going to want to do that. Nobody wants to hear me read Cory's book. There's no value there, and there's no authenticity. And so that that aspect of authenticity and the sort of deeper understanding of why people are interested in something is something that's really important that gets overlooked because people sort of see the superficial copying and they say, well, it's a perfect copy and, nobody's going to go to the original. But that's not true. And the more you look, the more you realize that people really do value authenticity and they're willing to pay for it in a lot of cases.
The thing that always shocks me is the extent, going back to what you were saying earlier about splogs, for example, and what a fool's errand it is to go after people who are basically crooks, right? And to try and get them to respect your copyrights. I mean, it's just crazy, right? I mean, they're already violating Google's terms of service. They're already doing lots of other things. Sending them a takedown notice isn't going to make any difference. It's like I guess it's like going after Al Capone for tax evasion, except that worked. But the thing that amazes me is when firms that have either investors or shareholders do this. And I just look at this and I'm like, moral outrage doesn't create dividends, right? What are their shareholders doing? These you've got, kind of white whale crazed Ahab CEOs directing their firm's energy and cash into shutting down things that on the one hand don't deprive them of any income, and on the other hand, if they were shut down, wouldn't generate new income. And I think unless the people who invested in this company did so with the understanding that they were funding a charity for the purpose of educating people about copyright law, shouldn't the shareholders be knocking on their door and going, I'd prefer that you spend our money on doing stuff that actually makes money?
Well, I mean,
Right.
it's part of this misperception, I think, and I've asked this question a bunch of times, which is, people get so focused on this thing, piracy or whatever you want to call it, and I hate the term piracy, but they get so focused on it they don't realize stomping out piracy, how does that make anyone buy anything else, right? How does that get people to buy anything more? And they don't have an answer. They're just like, well, of course, if there's no piracy, people will buy more. But there's no evidence to actually support that.
But I suspect, Cory, there have been instances where someone has made use of one of your works, either on Boing Boing or one of your books, that wasn't within the terms of the license that you have decided to take some action about. Has that happened?
I'm trying to think. An interesting thing about Creative Commons licenses that I think is often missed by people who are either, copy fighting free software types or lawyers is that nobody who's like a normal person actually ever reads even a license as simple as a CC license. And this is the genuinely funny thing about policy people or government people who say, well, we need to educate people more about copyright. I mean, you have Pam Samuelson saying, well, I've just spent a couple of years going through 17 USC and all the judge law, and it's impossible to understand. And we're like, well, we need to educate children or civilians about this. But, people, normal people don't even read Creative Commons licenses. They see the little bug. And what they get from that, by and large, in my experience, unless they're a licensing wonk, is the writer who wrote this or the creator who made this is basically a reasonable person who isn't going to be a dick about it. So don't be a dick about it either. That's really what it amounts to. It kind of amounts to a normative statement about reasonableness, about your normal intuition about what you can do with digital works. Of course you can discuss them, and the fact that discussions are now digital and involve making copies, well, it would be crazy to say you couldn't discuss them. I don't care what copyright law says. Let's just kind of go with the norm that we've had for centuries and port it seamlessly over to the digital world instead of declaring that because it's digital we can renegotiate everything, just slap some adhesion contracts on it, and or claim that a copy that happens when you put a Dilbert comic on your blog is just like the copy that happens when a publisher puts out a mass market Dilbert book and sells 20 million of them without Scott Adams' permission. It's just common sense recoils from it. So in my experience, the social contract is interesting because it tends to make advocates out of my readers who are incredibly ferocious in their advocacy. So I often get email about things that I consider kind of like too penny ante to bother with. Someone has a CD on eBay in which they've compiled 15,000 ebooks that they found from Gutenberg and other sources, and they're selling it for $1, and your book is one of the books in that. And I look at that and I go, there are so many more ways that I could make the that I could spend my time, and so much more money and artistic satisfaction and personal satisfaction that I could gain from doing things that don't involve sending takedown notices to this creep. And I just kind of move off. But I get fairly overheated emails from my readers going, I've just discovered this guy who's violating your license and violating the terms and violating the norms, and what are we going to do about this? And sometimes I go, well, if you feel like sending an email, you can. But more often, I'm like,
crowdsourcing your legal services.
That's right.
Well, there is this element of it that there's this sort of social contract behind all of it. I mean, just this week there was the story of the valedictorian speech at Columbia. I don't know if people saw this, where in the valedictorian speech he used a joke that was had been done by a written, created, and performed by a professional comedian, and in the speech he sort of acted as if it was a story that actually happened to him. And what happened was that story blew up, and it got all this attention. There's no real legal issue there. You can't really copyright a joke for the most part, and yet the sort of social response to this was totally untenable, and Columbia had to actually append a note to the video of the speech from the dean apologizing, and there was an apology from the student as well, and it got all this attention. And so there was this sort of ability for the community itself to sort of police that issue without having to go back to any legal stuff or any threat letters or anything like that. If you're going to be copying stuff, there's actually a social cost to it, and then a lot of that social cost is your reputation. And in an economy where reputation becomes increasingly important, if you screw that up by doing something outside of the social norms, you'll pay the price. Not necessarily monetarily or through the court system or through some sort of legal action, but just from your reputation being damaged.
And building on that notion of reputation, one of the things that happens when somebody copies someone else, just going back to the spam blogger or any kind of situation like this, they become ill-equipped to continue in any kind of innovation, if you will. I mean, because, again, there's no substance underlying it. So going to the example here of this valedictorian at Columbia, if you were put in the spotlight and asked to tell a joke or whatever and to try to continue that humor, there's not going to be anything to continue that trend on. So they're ill-equipped to innovate, which necessarily means that they're always going to be one or two steps behind. And that seems to me to be a losing proposition in most instances.
I think what we're trying to say here is that ideas are easy and execution is hard. Right, in the science fiction world, and I think also in regular novel writing, a recurring theme among writers who gripe about stuff is the reader who comes up and says, I've got a great idea for a story, you write it and we'll split the money, because the idea is clearly half the work here. I don't know any writer who isn't drowning in ideas and kind of grasping for time in which to execute them. The last thing anyone wants is for someone to come up and say, here, I've got another idea for you to stick in your queue. And so I think for people who are kind of into creativity and who want to pursue a career in the arts or in the creative fields, that ideas are actually way less precious than this notion of execution. Something else, Meg, that you said before that I thought was really funny is when you talked about people who write to you asking for permission to link or quote material that's in the public domain. I get these all the time. I get requests for, because all my Flickr photos, I got like 10,000 Flickr photos. They're all commercial attribution, and or maybe attribution share alike for some of them. And I get a lot of email from people going, I'd like to put this in my magazine. Do I have your permission? Blah, blah, blah. And I always go, it's in the CC license. I don't give permission for things that are already licensed. That undermines the purpose of the license. And then they sometimes they write back. They're very adamant, are you sure? Because I really need it. Our legal department really needs it. And if they're really kind of desperate, sometimes they'll say, okay, send me over your thing. And it turns out that what they don't want is permission. They want indemnity. Almost always these letters for permission are in fact a bunch of indemnifications and warranties about the work. And they want like worldwide indemnity against violations of any statute anywhere in the world in which they get the power to settle any claims that arise from it and bill you for it. And it's really funny. It's like, I don't even sign that when people are paying me. You got to be kidding.
Well, someone has obviously given someone too much credit in assuming that the legal department who gave that mandate for certainty, anybody in that department understood what the hell the Creative Commons license said in the first place. So There's the
So this legality of linking thing has been around since the dawn of the web and continues to be around. Just recently, somebody sent me a link to this New York Times article from April 8th on Japan's largest business newspaper, the Nikkei, which has some very draconian policies on when you can link to their articles. The link policy ends on an ominous note. We may seek damages for any violations of these rules. They've disabled the right click, which would give you the ability to copy the actual URL. So it continues. Sort of on the other end of the spectrum of what you guys are talking about. And as long as we're talking about links,
more to the point, they haven't disabled the right click. They put some JavaScript that tells your browser to disable the right click. And of course, if the right click is disabled, it's because you've disabled it, which is why this whole idea is so crazy, is because you're asking the attacker to run the script that undermines their capacity to do the thing you're trying to prevent. And all the attacker has to do to defeat your fiendish security measure that you spent a non-zero sum of money and time on is just not run your script, right? Turn on no script, do something else, use a different browser, and there goes your mighty efforts.
Hey, Virgil in the chat room sent over something interesting in IRC that I'll stick in the show notes about just talking about books and the way they change and alter over time. There's a Purdue professor whose name is Soren Matei, who is writing print books, but is putting anytime there is a hyperlink in the book, there is some sort of technology built into the book where you can photograph the page and hold it up to your web browser and it will take you to the link. So I guess you would perhaps hold the book up in front of your webcam and your browser would launch. And if there's a link there, it would, immediately make the offline world of your book come online if they've embedded one of these links. So that's kind of cool. Thank you, Virgil, for pointing that out.
Probably a QR code, right? Or
right,
yeah, or something like that. There's a few different, there have been a few different attempts to do those kinds of things, and I think last year, like John Mayer did a video that also used QR codes where you had to sort of, if you held up your iPhone to your webcam, it would like launch a special video. All sorts of things to try and integrate. I don't know how well those really work right now, but it does show some of the sort of interesting potential to sort of create these hybrid type solutions.
So one organization that has shown that it is not one to sit back and idly let people copy their works without having lots of vocal things to say about it is Perfect 10. And in their latest litigatory effort, they had their hats handed to them. Mike, you have a good post about this. Can you tell us what happened there and what it means to cloud service providers who are trying to let people share material online like Rapidshare?
Well, Perfect 10 has gotten their hat handed to them multiple times. Every single lawsuit that they've done on this, they're sort of an adult publisher, however you want to describe it, and they've been very upset that photos from their magazines have gotten online, and they've sued everyone over the year. I mean, basically every search engine. They sued Google, and there was a whole question over whether or not Google, because Google shows thumbnails of images from Perfect 10 magazines that other people scanned in, whether or not Google was actually liable for that. And basically, they keep losing. And the latest one was against Rapidshare. And it was a question of whether or not images that were hosted by Rapidshare, which is a locker for content, infringed on Perfect 10's copyrights. And there were a whole bunch of sort of somewhat specific issues to that case, but the court definitely sided, towards RapidShare's position, and part of it was, Perfect 10 basically, respond to this threat by just sending over a list of images. I think they may have sent a CD-ROM or a DVD of images, and basically told Rapidshare, find all these images and block them, and didn't indicate where they were, didn't use. Rapidshare apparently has a tool that lets you go in and say, okay, this a particular file is infringing, take it down. Perfect 10 made use of none of that stuff and just said, find and kill, whatever is infringing of ours on your system, and the court said, that's kind of silly, and I guess it's not a full ruling right now. It was just a question over whether or not there would be an injunction against Rapidshare before the full case goes on. But it definitely, what the judge was saying, definitely sounded like they sided with Rapidshare and all this stuff. The other aspect was also the fact that Rapidshare doesn't have its own search engine, that it's really just a file locker. The fact that other search engines can index what is in Rapidshare, basically that can't be blamed on Rapidshare was effectively what the ruling was saying.
I think the real problem with the case was that they just sent over a disk full of images from Perfect 10. I know that if anybody sent me a disk with that, my next step would not be to go look on my system. I would enjoy the disk for a while, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, actually, and what was impressive was the fact that
finding
Rapidshare,
things. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Rapidshare actually responded after they got the disk. They said they went and tried to find as many Perfect 10 images on Rapidshare as they could to take them down. They were doing Google searches and everything and trying to take down the content. So they actually, made a fair amount of effort to try to do whatever they could. And for Perfect 10, it was never enough because it seems
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
In all their spare time. Talking about search engines and their connection to liability for infringement or helping people find infringing works. I have a link in our discussion points to just the announcement about GoogleTV. And I forget where it was that I saw somebody querying whether there were legal issues that were going to crop up around having a TV search related technology. And for folks who haven't yet checked out, it's not available yet, but was announced earlier this week at Google I/O. Google plans to have a set-top box that will marry search with television. And in what sounds like a very intuitive way, let you type in the name of the show you're looking for, and it will show you all the various places that you can find it. And I don't know enough about how this is going to work to know whether it's going to winnow out various unauthorized places where you might be able to find that show, as opposed to Hulu, somebody who has just posted it up and maybe it's temporarily available until it's caught and a DMCA notice is issued or other takedown procedure. So I'm just wondering, does anybody, Evan, let's start with you, think that there's any permutation on marrying search with television that begins to take the ordinary immunities that search engines enjoy out of play?
Good question. And it would seem to me that the legal issue would arise on whether or not doing it this way is going to fall outside of the definition of what an online service provider is in the DMCA, because that seems to be where we would be looking for at least a safe harbor here. And then as we were talking, with Fred von Lohman last week, that may not be the be-all and end-all, because we've got to remember that the DMCA only is kind of a backstop against a lot of this on the question of liability, and that a plaintiff alleging some kind of secondary liability for copyright infringement still has the burden, in the absence of the DMCA, to prove all of the elements, whether it be an inducement theory or a contributory liability theory or something like that. So like you, I don't know enough about the technology and how it's going to work and how it's actually going to look, when you actually do this thing. But it would seem to me that moving out of this the space that digital media has generally traveled over the internet into a more innovative, progressive model like this might stretch those definitions a little bit. So that's where I would be kind of looking for questions to arise on this.
Yeah. Cory, any thoughts on whether Google TV might not be as useful as it could be because of concerns over copyright violations?
Well, I think that Google in the last 6 or 8 months has become very unapologetic about itself, and has really kind of, I think, found its mojo again. I hope that means that they'll be really good about this, that they will build the best digital TV thingum that they can, as opposed to trying to predict what will make Hollywood happy. I think that, between the Viacom suit and the incredibly good PR that they've gotten out of kicking ass with the phone companies and with the network companies through Gigabit and through the Nexus One and the Android OS, that they're starting to realize that Hollywood and the phone companies and the Chinese government, those people are never going to like them. And it doesn't really matter what concessions they make, they're still going to have giant rights holder cartels coming after them, not because the cartel necessarily believes that there's a legitimate claim, but rather because the cartel either sees deep pockets or a better service that they either can shut down and then clone, or shut down and then own, in the way that they did with Napster. And so you look at all that stuff flying back and forth in Viacom, and leaving aside all the hilarious profanity in the Viacom stuff, the thing that's really telling is all these Viacom executives going, I want to own YouTube. Let's use the law so that we can own YouTube. We are going to take over YouTube, and I'm going to be in charge of it.
Right. There was that specific statement in there, I want to run it. And then the other guy says, no, not on my watch. Mike, any thoughts on Google TV?
I think kind of what Cory said pretty much covers what I think. I mean, you always worry, that with any kind of new innovative technology that someone's going to get upset and there's going to be lawsuits, and you hope that, with a company in Google's position, that they're willing to sort of stand up and fight. I'm not entirely convinced that Google has totally found its mojo. I think they used to be, they would have a really, they would take a really strong stance on some of these things. I think, things with like the Google book settlement, I thought was kind of a disappointment, where they really sort of backed down and kind of tried to use that to route around some other issues. And there have been a few other cases lately where they've been sued and they sort of have backed down a little bit. To some extent, it looks like they're picking their battles here and there. And you hope that this is a case where they'll really stand up for the right to do something really cool and really innovative. But I think we kind of have to wait and see to figure out what they actually do.
I have a slightly different gloss on Google Book Settlement. I think that what you had with Google Book Settlement is a strange breakdown in the class action system, where you had Google going, well, what would be a pretty good outcome here would be to have like a fair use ruling about scanning and displaying snippets, because there's no way we would ever be able to like individually license all these books and orphan works and so on from all these writers. That would be impossibly expensive and logistically crazy. And then the Authors Guild shows up and says, we represent 8,000 writers out of the millions that have lived and will lived, and we'd like to be certified as a class to negotiate with you to give you a settlement for what amounts to a pittance to get something that you would never be able to get commercially. And we're so naive about it that we'll even offer you a settlement that is structured such that like no one will ever be able to effectively compete with you. And what Google did was nothing. Right? They just sat there and said, oh, you want to be certified as a class to make us this offer that, like, if the other writers out there in the world had any idea that you were making it, they would go completely crazy and object to it, but they don't and they won't, and we're the only people in the world who would have a standing really to object to this and stop it from happening. Yeah, we'll let you do that. I kind of wish that the Authors Guild hadn't been there. I kind of wish that we had some good fair use dicta out of this, and I really wish that we had a more competitive landscape for blanket licensing of orphan works and other kinds of blanket licensing coming out of the Google Book Search settlement. But I think that was just Google being incredibly clever.
Cory, another thing that Google announced recently, and you touched on a bit on TWiL last week, was this VP8 video standard that they're going to open source. And you mentioned that we need to be cognizant of how this is released, because if I understand the logic here correctly, we have issues of the content industries building in various content protection measures through the component parts of the tools that we all use every day, and that this would be another way in which that could happen, as well as a way for folks to come in after the fact and ask for royalties or other kind of payment by using something that turns out, was intended as open source, but whoops, we didn't quite manage to cross all the T's and dot all the I's in that regard. Have I kind of framed that properly?
I don't know if that's actually a worry I have much about the old Onto codec. It seems to me like what Google's about to do with Onto, it looks pretty comprehensively open. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how it seemed to me. But I think that in terms of proprietary codecs like H.264, even ones that are nominally free to use and that are that have a large cartel that controls them, that seem to represent all the different stakeholders, that it's pretty risky. When I was negotiating DRM standards in Europe, or more importantly, trying to stop them from happening during their negotiations, one of the phrases that kept recurring was hook IP. So this is what like DRM cartel members talk about. They say, we need to add a superfluous element that is licensable to the standard, so that in order to implement the standard, you have to take a license, and we can add arbitrary conditions to the license about what you can and can't do that don't have any nexus with what law allows you to do or not do. So we can say, okay, well, here's a video standard, and we just added this like one patentable element to it. We've added this one patentable element to it, and that patentable element, in order to license it, it doesn't really need to run the video, but in order to license it, you have to promise that you won't output to equipment that hasn't been blessed by this organization. That's, I think most of us have an intuition that that's not how a standard is supposed to work. The way that a standard is supposed to work is like you describe the thing that you're supposed to do in order to technically interoperate with it, and then if people do that technical thing, then they should be able to interoperate with it. This kind of full employment for contract lawyers, and this kind of cold dead hand of the cartel being able to reach out and dictate terms is pretty creepy.
One issue that you raised was whether it's possible to put something out there that can be freely licensed in perpetuity. It seems to me like the Linux people have been grappling with this for quite some time, and through their various iterations, and perhaps exhausting many of the possible lawyer billable hours from now until the heat death of the universe, as you said on Twit, have managed to do something that works pretty well in that arena, and that could be the model for what happens here. It involves obtaining representations and warranties on the front end as to what's going into what comes out the back end for people to use. And I don't know if that's necessarily an analogy that works here. But
well, I guess
beyond, there have been lots of patent issues that have been raised about this VP8 and whether Google would be authorized to do what it intends to do because it's so close to H.264.
Yeah, I get the patent stuff here is where it really all breaks down, and it doesn't break down because of what is or isn't in the patent. It breaks down because of the USPTO's total negligence, right? Where the USPTO fundamentally just gives you a patent on anything that you ask to have patented, and then invites you to litigate the question for as long as you'd like with anyone else they've happened to have granted that patent to, and so what that means is that you have all kinds of stuff that probably shouldn't be in patent that is, and it also means that what should be the most defensive patent of all, which is no patent, doesn't work, right? So I often have entrepreneurs who are starting companies say, my VC wants me to take out a defensive patent. Should I do it? How does that work? I certainly don't want to get sued by one of the big guys and so on. And I've never heard a really compelling account of how a defensive patent might work. I mean, theoretically, the best defense against a patent is disclosure, right? You disclose how it works, and then the USPTO should never give anyone a patent on that invention because you've disclosed it. There's prior art and they should be able to find it, except because they're very negligent, they do. So whenever I hear about defensive patents and startups, it always seems like the reason that a VC wants a patent in a startup is because they know that 2/3 of the companies, at least, that they fund are not going to become commercially successful. And when they break you up for parts, in addition to selling off your Aeron chairs and IKEA desks, they want to sell your patents. And the primary customer for that patent is a patent troll who will then go around and not make anything, just sue people who try to make it. And particularly, they'll sue you, right, when you start another company to try it again, because most people who do something successful take more than one go to get there. And so really, what those defensive patents end up meaning is a 20-year moratorium on working on the field that you've invented.
Mike, Dana Blankenhorn thinks that this VP8 WebM standard is a real blow against the content industry. Did you take a look at that, and do you have any thoughts along those lines?
I didn't see Dana's thoughts specifically, so I can't directly comment on that. I mean, I do think that sort of going back to the patent issue, that there's going to be a patent battle over it. I think MPEG LA made that pretty clear in sort of what they've been saying, is that they're sort of getting together plans to take this on, and they've sort of hinted in the past that any kind of digital video is going to violate some patents that they as a pool have the rights to. And so my question about all this is, how long is this going to be tied up in lawsuits? Because as we all know, even if you go to various so-called rocket dockets, patent lawsuits and all the appeals, and if the PTO decides to re-examine different patents, these things take many, many, many years. And so as interesting as the Google announcement is, I kind of wonder how much is going to happen there, while a lot of it is going to be tied up in the court system for a while.
Evan, do you think that we're going to get bogged down on this, or that this stands to be a way of decoupling content controls from actually enjoying entertainment?
I'm not worried too much about things getting bogged down. I think, like so many things we've seen in the past, and this is a point I've brought up when we've talked about the patent litigation over the multi-touch interface, this is something that harkens back to the early days, the early 80s, the Apple computer versus Franklin, the question about the copyrightability of a user interface, those types of things, whether it's copyrightable for a window, porting that over into a patent context here. Things are not going to be bogged down over the next few years. There's going to be meaningful licensing arrangements that come about this, and the ecosystem is going to find some kind of equilibrium, some kind of stasis that it can find its way in all of this stuff. And this is a good example of Google's mode of being, as Cory characterized it a while ago, rather unapologetic about these things. I get the impression that they're kind of charging ahead. Maybe that's bravado, who knows? But it'll sort its way out relatively smoothly. That's my feeling.
So another thing multiple people pointed me toward this week, and Mike, you did a post about it, was a TED Talk that talked about copyright and the fashion industry, two of my favorite topics. Why don't you bring us up to speed about that, and let us know what's going on there, and how fashion is different from, say, music or film in the way that it's developed along those lines.
Sure. So the fashion industry has actually been a really interesting one to look at, and it was kind of an example for many years, and there have been discussions and studies on it for quite some time, because while there are certainly trademarks in the fashion industry, there's really realistically no copyright on designs. And there, different people have different opinions on this. So there's definitely a movement among some designers to say, well, that it needs to be added. And yet, if you look at the fashion industry, it's highly competitive and it's highly innovative. And if the purpose of copyright law is to, create incentives for creating more works and to be innovative, then, if you take that standard and look at the fashion industry, there's no reason why you would want to add any copyright, because the industry appears to be working. But where it gets even more interesting is that different studies have looked really closely at what's happened with the fashion industry and have realized that not only does the lack of copyright for designs not harm the industry, there's actually a fair amount of evidence that it's helped the industry, and because it's done a few different things. And one is that it's helped diffuse different ideas more quickly, which actually helps create fashion trends, which are really important to the fashion industry. And in some ways, this even goes back to kind of what Cory was talking about at the beginning with the free ebook, where it helps get the ideas out there and spread them and build up reputation and build up attention. And that's what copies of high-end fashion design has done. And it's also sort of allowed segmentation in the market, where people who would never buy a high-end design at super expensive prices are able to go in and buy a much less expensive, perhaps lower quality knockoff version of it. But the argument that that some make that this harms the high-end designers is there's very little support for it. And there was actually a study which wasn't mentioned in that presentation and wasn't mentioned in the post, but this was from a few months ago, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, that showed that of people who buy knockoffs, they're not fooled. Nobody buys a knockoff, or very few people buy a knockoff thinking that it's the high-end version of it. And a lot of times they're buying the knockoff because they really would like to buy the real version. And later on, I think the number was I think they were looking at purses, and they said that 40% of the people who bought a knockoff designer purse later, at some later date when they could afford it, when they had the situation that worked for them, they went and bought the legit version. So it actually acted as kind of an entryway, a sort of not first one's free, but first one's cheap version to get people into buying a designer, in this case, handbag. And so it's this market that has really figured out, you don't need this copyright to limit competition. There are ways that the market actually functions very, very well, and part of that is that it also creates incentives to keep innovating, where nobody can rest on their laurels. A high-end designer can't put out something and say, okay, that's it. Now I can kind of, hang out and I don't have to work on my next big design for a while. They know that as soon as their design comes out, someone's going to copy it. And so everyone wants to see, what's the next thing that they're going to do. So it actually gives them more incentive to innovate more, to do more innovative things, and to do so quickly, which is the types of things that from a policy perspective, if the idea is to create incentives, should be seen as a good thing. That lack of copyright may actually help make that industry more creative and more competitive than if there were copyright.
So I think that...
go ahead, Cory.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, Evan can go ahead. No? Okay. Well, so I think that a nice way of summing that up is that asking an industry about its emotional relationship with the monopolies it has or seeks is not a good way to predict what the best way to run that industry would be. I think in most industries, you have big firms that would love to be able to acquire regulatory monopolies that they could use to exclude competitors and to keep prices high. But historically, I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that those companies are wrong, right? That actually not only doesn't make them better companies, it doesn't make the industry better either. And Jamie Boyle does a great job of doing this. And Jamie was one of the advisors to the Ready to Share project from the Lear Center at USC, where this came out of. And Jamie talks about the database copyrights, where there's the sui generis right in Europe. That gives you exclusive rights over factual databases, and there's no such right in America. And in 20 years, the American industry has grown something like 25-fold, and the European industry has actually contracted slightly. And would have contracted a lot more, except some of those European companies spent a bunch of money buying American companies that do most of their trading in places where they don't have this exclusive right. And in America, you have the world's biggest databases and the world's biggest database industry, and the most money arising from the use and sale of databases. And so the interesting thing is that when the European Commission investigated whether or not we should keep the database right in Europe, what they found was that the economists universally agreed that the database right was actually making less money than no database right would. But the people who ran the database companies, even the ones that were making more money overseas in places where they didn't have a database right, were emotionally very invested in their monopoly. They loved it. And the commission said, well, on the one hand, we have all these facts, and on the other hand, we have, these emotional utterances from captains of industry. I guess we'll weigh them about equally and cancel the whole thing. We'll just keep the database right, which, anyone who actually believes that Brussels is ruled by technocrats, I think, finds their rebuttal neatly there.
Evan, I'm curious for you to respond as a copyright lawyer to how we've wound up in a situation where we have certain industries that put forth commodities that are valuable and unique and involve a lot of creativity that are definitely subject to copyright laws. And we've had the fashion industry, which certainly meets all those initial criteria, that isn't within that rubric. Can you comment on that for us and give us the framework?
One way that I can easily distinguish the fashion industry from everything else that you're talking about is the reason or the motivation for someone to purchase a product that is that embodies this creativity. When you're talking about designs of fashion, you're doing something that is an expression of yourself. You don't buy a book and then wear it in the way that you would wear an article of clothing. Now, you may take that book and espouse the ideas that are mentioned in it and, use it to cloak yourself in a certain ideology, but that's, clearly metaphorical and much more abstract than what you do with fashion. So I'm really intrigued by this study that Mike talks about in the post here on Tech Dirt about the theory being that one of the reasons that fashion can be so quickly evolutionary is because of this absence of copyright, as if to suggest that if there were copyright in place, strong copyright protection in place on these items, then there would be not as much change and innovation, presumably because a designer wouldn't feel comfortable in doing something so soon afterward because there would be a risk of infringement here. So that whole notion is intriguing to me, but I'm wondering if there's some kind of extra outside of the ordinary paradigm influence going on here, that being this maybe it's some kind of Darwinian evolutionary impulse that we all have, the same reason that, the males of most species of birds are more, brightly colored and have more flamboyant plumage than others. I don't know, I'm getting way off here, but there's something driving the purchase of articles that are that could be considered fashion items. I'm trying to talk about this most generally as possible. There's something that's motivating the purchase of those things and the innovation that would go into the development of those things different than there is that goes into the development of, a database or something that's clearly copyrightable, a piece of software, a novel, a painting, something like that. So that's where I see some interesting things going on here, and one meaningful way for us to think of these in copyright terms and to assemble it into the notions that seem to be embodied into this study that Mike was talking about in this post.
So as a clerk in an academic bookstore, or former clerk in an academic bookstore, I'm here to tell you that some people do buy Kierkegaard books as fashion accessories.
well, if there was one to do that, it would be Kierkegaard. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And just,
and people, I'm just thinking of myself. I have a little page off my website where I put up books that I like and recommend, and because I want to share that information. I think other people might like them too, but there is some sort of identity thing involved in aligning yourself with certain things that you've read, like Rework, Evan.
Right.
That, begin to inform your own philosophies and
that's definitely true of music as well, right? I mean, people definitely use music as a fashion statement, whether it's, blaring the music loudly so that other people can hear it, or wearing, t-shirts from a band or anything like that. Music and books and in some cases even movies, I would say, really do become fashion statements for people as well. So I think that some of what applies to the fashion industry definitely bleeds into those other industries as well.
I think the traditional music as a fashion statement technique is to hover near the band's bin at your local record store, and then whenever anyone comes by, you shout, "Their first album was better."
Absolutely. So I stuck a link in here to something that is a summary press release kind of thing from RSA, the security division of EMC. And Microsoft commissioned a study that I just thought it tickled me when I read the results of it, or it made me think that actually law is working the way that we'd like it to work, although the people formulating the summary here don't think so. And it's basically saying that in the wake of various laws that have been put into place that require data security measures to be undertaken to make sure that there are not leaks, and what happens if people's personal information gets out there, what you have to do to respond, and what sort of compliance you have to do to show that you're taking all the necessary steps to protect information that you have under your control, whether you're a bank or other organization that collects personal information from folks. That what winds up happening is companies spend more money on that because there's compliance involved than they do on protecting their own IP. And there's some big complaints here, and sort of alarm bells ringing that, oh, your information is definitely more valuable, I guess, than your customers' information, and you shouldn't be discounting your obligation or your responsibility to make sure that your own data is as secure as that has been entrusted to you. So I threw that in there just because it just made me say, oh, noes, you mean that companies are actually responding by being more cognizant of what happens to the data they're responsible for third parties rather than their own? Well, not such a bad thing. Did you guys read this?
I think that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that why you create whopping great fines, is to see if you can convince companies to actually treat this externality as though it mattered?
That would be my theory, but I thought it was pretty funny that the way that this was spun by the people who commissioned the study was, oh, you really need to go ahead and assess what's happening with your own IP and take comparable steps because your priorities are way out of whack here. Mike, any thoughts on this?
Oh, well, I mean, I think to some extent, when there are, regulatory rules or regimes that is going to direct focus in one way or the other, I agree. I think in this case, it may have worked the way it should, and that, it should be more important for companies to protect the data that they're entrusted with. And there have been other studies. I didn't get a chance to look at this study in any detail, but there have been other studies about how, a lot of companies really treat, the data that they're entrusted with and the security of it as sort of, something that, well, if there is a breach, it's actually, cheaper to just pay for dealing with the breach than it is to really secure that data in a lot of cases. And so, which is one of the reasons why you see so many stories of breaches and so much data getting lost and leaked. And at this point, people almost to the point of just assuming that if they've given their data to some company, it's probably going to get leaked sooner or later, one way or the other. So if there is actually, companies really starting to invest in protecting the data they're entrusted with, that would probably be a good thing.
Yeah, one of my stops on this tour was a high school in Skokie, Illinois, where they wanted ID, and so I have crummy ID that just has my name and picture on it that I use in those ridiculous situations like going into skyscrapers in Manhattan. They said, no, this ID won't do. We also need your date of birth. And I said, wow, that sounds like a lot of information. Yeah, my date of birth is available on Wikipedia and so on, but that just sounds like a lot of information to routinely request. What do you do with it? And they said, well, we don't keep it. And I said, okay, who gets to see it? And they said, well, it's a third party. I said, well, do they keep it? And they said, well, we don't think so. And I said, do you have anything in writing I could see that has your privacy policy? No, we don't have that. But you need to know that it's a misdemeanor in Illinois to refuse to show identification on entering a school. And I'm an ex-policeman, and I can have you arrested if you don't show me some ID right now. It was pretty crazy, and it epitomizes that idiotic security syllogism. Something must be done. We have done something, therefore something has been done. The closest I got to an explanation out of them was that I might be a sex offender, so they wanted to look me up in the sex offender registry, and as a parent, at first blush, I'm like, okay, well, sex offenders shouldn't be allowed in schools. And then the more I think about it, the more I think, I stood at a podium in front of hundreds of children and their teachers. Even if I was a sex offender, sex offending is not Ebola. It's not radiation. It's like a thing that people do in private rooms. I don't know how a sex offender would end up sex offending while reading from a novel in a school library. It was pretty bizarre.
Yeah, it is definitely, and it's a good opportunity too. I wanted to ask you, Cory, on the front of privacy, which has definitely been on everybody's radar lately as Facebook has undergone its latest change in settings and the backlash there too. I wondered, as legislators here in the United States begin to pay attention to these things and rework the privacy framework that we've had in place since the mid-90s, I wanted to get your take, Cory, having lived in both worlds, on how you think the more stringent EU framework works, and do you think that that's a valid model for folks here in the U.S.?
I think that the problem with the EU framework is that it assumes negotiating parity among parties. It's not supposed to, but it ends up doing it. And just as with HIPAA here, anytime you're in a situation which there's Data Protection Act or kind of sensitivity, someone's always getting you to waive your data protection rights. Or disclosing that they're about to use this in incredibly terrible, awful ways, but you don't really, it's a service that you absolutely need. That if you try to ride the London Underground without buying a prepaid Oyster card, you end up paying 2 or 3 times as much. So it seems not to have worked very well in my experience, and it also has been almost entirely subverted by data retention, which is the flip side of this, where now you have, in the name of fighting terror, you have giant amounts of information being harvested.
and that's led to the situation I mentioned yesterday about Google is now fighting over the Wi-Fi data collection, where they collected all this data, they claim by accident, and there are questions about that. But the German government and the Hong Kong government have demanded to see the data, and Google is saying, no, wait, we can't. That would violate the privacy regulations that you put in place. And so this data is in limbo because they can't delete it, because that might be deleting evidence. And they can't, they never should have collected it in the first place, but they don't know what to do with it, and nobody can look at it because that creates a privacy problem. And so you have these sort of competing regulations where nothing makes sense. And one of the things that I was looking into the whole privacy policy issue thing recently, partly for specific reasons having to do with my company, where we were trying to wade through the details of the EU privacy regulations and the safe harbor if you're collecting any data from EU people in the US. And the thing that struck us as we were going through all these different regulations from about the EU privacy is that it's really just a money-making scheme. You basically have to keep paying people to say I'm in compliance, and that they're going to check on you. And who knows if they're ever actually going to check, but all I know is that we just had to keep signing forms and writing checks. And I was saying, what does this have to do with privacy? It has nothing to do with privacy. It's all about, getting money out of us. And so, and that's kind of what happens with some of these regulations where, you put a name on it, oh, it's a big, important privacy regulation to protect privacy, but it really has nothing to do with actually protecting people's privacy.
Right.
So
a whole layer of industry springs up to help with the compliance side.
Yeah, absolutely.
It highlights the uranium-like nature of personal information, that, raw uranium ore is not very dangerous. And if you happen to dig some up out of the ground and you don't like it anymore, you put it back in the ground and you're done with it. And it's kind of mild enough that you can send it through the American postal system. You can buy it on Amazon for your science fair projects. But once you refine that into plutonium, it's immortal, pluripotent, instantaneously fatal, and you're kind of in this regulatory hell. And those little frames and packets that Google captured from those Wi-Fi networks individually as they disappeared off into the ether were not all that important. But having aggregated them, they've created data plutonium, and now they've got a waste disposal problem that is going to haunt them, like with plutonium for 750,000 years.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as Facebook goes, is anybody resting better at night now that Zuckerberg has come out and said we're simplifying your privacy controls? And has anybody even seen those simplified controls yet? Evan, anything changed on your end?
It's a nice little graph now, a matrix where you can see everything on one page. I don't feel that I have any more control over it. I feel that I perhaps could have a better sense of what my privacy settings are without having to use something like reclaimprivacy.org, that little bookmarklet that we were talking about last week or the week before. So it's a nice gesture. It's the right thing to do to at least give lip service to this. I don't know if it's anything more than, BP giving lip service to the fact that they're trying to stop that, that oil leak that you might have heard about. But in any event, I guess I'm not sleeping any better, but I'm glad to see that that there's something going on there.
Cory, you're not looking to reinstate your Facebook page?
No, I didn't use it much before, but I also think that, this is just part of the standard MO for Facebook, which is to take away an enormous amount of privacy through something really disgusting and dumb, attract a lot of public disapprobation, and then relent by returning to a norm that's actually slightly more restricted than the one that they had before. It's kind of, slow tightening of the ratchet that makes them look like they're being responsive when in fact what they're doing is just taking away all the privacy you can have. So I hate to do this, but I've got another podcast starting in like 3 minutes, and I've got to run.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure, as always, to see you.
Thanks.
And good luck in your new career as a burgeoning game designer. I cannot wait to play Savage Wonderland.
I just write about them. I don't design them.
I take it you must have gotten some help from Alice on that front.
That's right. Yeah, living with a pro gamer helps.
Yes. All right. Well, take care. And folks can, of course, find you at craphound.com, at Doctorow on Twitter, and boingboing.net. Thanks a lot,
I'm the
Cory.
first Cory in Google.
The first Cory in Google. All right. Good luck with the rest of the tour.
See ya.
Good to talk with you, Cory.
Nice talking with you. See you guys.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye.
All right. Hey, Mike and Evan, we can go a bit longer if the two of you can. Does that work for both of you? I have a few more links we could hash through.
Yeah, it works great. I'm all good.
I should be able to stick around for a little while, assuming nobody kicks me out of this conference room. But
this is probably the longest period of time that Tech Dirt has gone without attention from Mike Masnick. I feel like I'm getting the shakes.
I know. Mike, you are amazingly prolific.
Well, I checked the site. There have been a few posts while we've been talking, so I'm good at multitasking.
You are. You must do them in your sleep and then farm them out during the day. One thing as we sign off with Cory here and round out the Facebook discussion, I haven't deleted my own profile, and it was incredibly useful in getting you on the show today, Mike, because I didn't have your email, but I could find you on Facebook and message you there. And a lot of times people will respond to that because it goes to their primary email, and you're off to the races. So I don't know. I mean, I do watch Facebook with a close eye and have concerns about what they're doing. I'm not quite as I haven't written them off, I think, to the extent that Cory has, in that, everything that it sounds like what he was saying is that, they've pretty much made a decision that they're going to gobble up all your information and they're going to take whatever steps necessary to do that. I actually thought their response with, Zuckerberg standing in a pretty informal environment with some very basic PowerPoint slides behind him, having a straightforward discussion about all this, that struck me as nice. I don't know if that's quite the word. I responded well to it from a visceral level. I felt like that this was a credible and concerned response to all the issues that had been raised. And, I haven't gone through and examined my privacy settings since he did all that, because mine were pretty locked down anyway. But Evan, you say that things have changed and it's a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to just kind of see it all in one place. And, the nature of the privacy concern that I have with Facebook is not so much what Facebook's going to be doing with it, but how data might get out there and be aggregated with, some of the third-party providers that run content or advertising through other sites. And so in that respect, Facebook would not, on my list, be any greater of a potential perpetrator than any other site that has content or ads served up from a third party, whether that be from DoubleClick or any other advertising network or whatever. And, this leakage of information out there, combining information that may be in a cookie stored on my hard drive with my Facebook ID number or something like that. It's that kind of privacy concern that I have from being online, rather than just how my hometown may inadvertently be disclosed because I don't know or didn't know how to make sure that only friends could see it instead of friends of friends. So in a large respect, a lot of the talk that we have been going over in the last few weeks about Facebook and privacy, not just the last few weeks, but the last couple of years, really may be just kind of an indication or a machination of the real privacy concerns that we should all be having here. Much more subtle vectors for information about us to be out there, especially in light of the presence of re-identification technologies that would be able to mine huge databases of information that's out there about us and reassemble that. We've talked about this before, populating our own databases of ruin, from that information that may inadvertently be out there in vectors that we wouldn't even suspect or even know how to close, like we would just changing a binary Facebook setting like that.
Well, I think what we'll do, we've gone for a while here. I'd like to wrap up with our tip of the week and then some fun stories as we go out. The tip is going to touch on two different stories and have two different prongs. And it is, first, don't spam your judge. And second, don't pose as your kid on Facebook. So let's go to Mike. Mike, why don't you tell us why you shouldn't spam your judge?
It probably doesn't make the judge feel particularly well disposed towards you. I guess in this case where the guy was Kevin Trudeau was held in contempt for asking his followers to he didn't say spam, but he did say give their thoughts to the judge, and the judge apparently was not real happy about getting all that and charged him with contempt. It turns out that the contempt finding was kind of tossed out.
Yeah, that's the real interesting kind of wrinkle here is that the judge came down and said, hey, I don't need to be receiving all this sort of lobbying mail from your fans. And I'm going to hold you in contempt, and that got overturned. I was actually kind of surprised by that. I guess it limited the scope of the court's contempt reach to actions that take place actually within the courtroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was sort of a technicality in terms of exactly why it got overturned. There may still be some other issues there. You could, in theory, still get charged with contempt for doing the same thing. It wasn't the ruling that overturned the contempt wasn't this sort of blanket like it's okay to spam the judge.
Right.
But just from a common sense standpoint, the judge is in charge of making decisions about your case and your life in some ways, and doing anything that's going to annoy that judge is just probably not a good idea in general from a common sense standpoint, no matter what the law says about whether or not you can get charged with contempt for it.
And that wouldn't be a bad idea in any jurisdiction anywhere, but it seems like it would be a particularly bad idea here in the Northern District of Illinois. This, of course, all happened in Chicago, and that's where I practice, and I have appeared in front of Judge Gettleman many times. And my first impression about this whole story was, I was very surprised that it happened, and my thought was, this must have really been pretty bad and pretty creepy, because Judge Gettleman is very soft-spoken. He's very deliberate. He's a very smart judge, of course, but he is slow to anger. And so he's not that kind of judge who would, you would imagine in kind of a comedic kind of way, really throwing the book at someone or slamming the gavel down on them without it really being bad. The reason that I say that it would be a particularly bad idea here in the Northern District is I don't know how much this made it into the national media. I know that it would have been in the national media, and particularly those who would pay attention to this. But there have been at least one district court judge here in the Northern District of Illinois who had her family had suffered violence at the hands of one of the litigants. Judge Lefkoe, her husband, was murdered 2 or 3, 4 years ago. So I think when it got to the point where Judge Gettleman may have felt some kind of, threat, that here's these crazy followers of Trudeau here who are intimating that they may do violence to him. That's really when it got spooky, and you call in the marshals and you enter a contempt order and stuff like that. So I think it's important to keep that whole human context of that in mind when thinking about all this. Going up to the Seventh Circuit as it did, Judge Tinder, who wrote the opinion there, very smart judge. He gave it a very deliberate treatment, I think it was well reasoned. But you can't put aside the fact this historical context, if you will, this factual context for all of this stuff going on. it's much more than just having your BlackBerry frozen up.
And who is this Trudeau guy? He's some kind of infomercial maven?
Yeah, he's a pitch man, right? Isn't he, Mike? Do you know?
Yeah. I forget exactly what I think he was pitching. It may have been like a cure for cancer or some sort of natural health something or another. I forget the specifics of it. But yeah, pretty well known kind of infomercial-y type guy.
He's no Billy Mays.
No. And who is? Evan, I thought immediately of one of our pet doctrines, the trespass to chattels doctrine. When you start filling up somebody's inbox without their permission, can they come after you? In that regard, I don't really ever see a judge doing that, deciding to use anything other than their ability to control their courtroom to control this kind of activity. But something that could crop up. And then the second part was don't pose as your kid on Facebook. Evan, you want to tell us about that one?
Oh, this is great. This is one of those stories that has something for everyone. I think it was down in I wanted to remember the name of the town. It was in Arkansas, but it was like Arkadelphia, right? The name of the town. I just loved that. I'd never heard of that before.
Get the specific town.
Yeah, I know it was something on Philadelphia, like Adelphia, something. Long story short, this seems to have happened. I think that this verdict came down just in the last couple of days. A woman was convicted of a misdemeanor harassment because she essentially locked her 17-year-old son out of his Facebook account. And what's more, she actually posted some stuff on there that the report we read on this characterized as vulgar. For example, she said something like, the biggest regret in life I have is having a kid. I think her story was that she thought she was logged into her own account, perhaps, or something, and thought she was posting that on her own, her own Facebook in connection with her own Facebook profile, as if that would be much of a defense. But it's a weird situation here, because what we have is a mother convicted of committing a crime, the crime of harassment, against her minor son. Now, her minor son wasn't living with her. He lived with his grandmother for about the last 5 years or so, from what I gather from this story. So this is one of those situations where, first of all, it's fun to kind of make fun of, and we really shouldn't, because these are real people and real emotions and real feelings that we're dealing with. But it's easy to kind of point to them and say, "Oh, isn't that very Jerry Springer," and all that stuff. But when we stop and think about it, this is troubling from both sides. I mean, it looks like the mom was treating the kid really rotten. I mean, no 17-year-old, nobody should be treated like this. Should be treated by their mother like this. That there's obviously some big issues here. But the other side of it is, this is really troubling if you're going to have the government stepping in this way and interfering, so to speak, with familial relations in this way, by saying that a parent can so easily commit a crime of harassment against their children. I could see some conservative voices piping up on this and saying that this is this smacks way too much of paternalism, and saying that this is a meddling into the familial type of relationship here. So it's one of those things where you can see it from both sides, and it's particularly interesting to us because all of this crazy stuff was occasioned by the use of technology, namely our favorite source of this stuff, Facebook.
There was one of the aspects also that was troubling in the ruling and sort of the reasoning behind the judge's decision, which kind of struck me as odd, was part of the reasoning was that the mother, I guess, had left some voicemails for her son that included some inappropriate language, had included curse words, and the story from the mother was basically like, well, that's basically how how me and my son talk. We use that kind of language. And the judge came back and said, well, that's inappropriate. And immediately it's like, okay, well, isn't that something that should be decided between the parent and the kid? And I'm certainly not advocating that parents curse at their children, which is not a parenting technique that I use or would use. But it did seem a little strange that was part of the reasoning was, well, it's harassment if you curse at your child. Maybe that's something that's getting the government stepping in a little too closely into terms of what is how does someone handle their relationship with their children.
I picked up on that too, and granted, we're not reading a written opinion by the judge. We're just reading this news article about it. But there was a quote in there that and it was this point that you were talking about, Mike, where he said, and I'm not reading it. I'm just going off of memory. But I do recall that he said that, talking about swearing to the child, the judge must have said in open court, nobody has a right to do that. And I thought to myself, well, is that really true? I mean, what about a First Amendment right? Even if it's really rotten and it's not good parenting, do I not have the right to say HE double hockey sticks to in the presence
right.
of my children?
And the guy who's the subject of that stuff my dad said Twitter page and now book is going to find himself arrested.
Right.
Pronto, if that's the standard.
And maybe I will too, because I was listening to a podcast about it, and my 4-year-old was there, and I didn't know that he was going to hear that word. Right.
Okay, a couple of other, one breaking news item, Mike, you'll want to get this up on TechDirt ASAP. It's probably already there, is that, we've been waiting for the other shoe to drop in the Hurt Locker cases. We knew they were gearing up to file. It appears 5,000 people have been now sued. You probably have a post on that already.
It is already up, so
Yay.
you can go see. It went up towards the beginning of the show, but there is a post about it. Yeah, the first sort of 5,000 of those cases. I mean, it's all John Doe IDs, and I think they reserve the right to add more to the case. But yeah, they finally filed. It was earlier this week, but it came out this morning.
So that's good to know. One thing that somebody sent my way this week that I thought was hilarious is the BP Public Relations Twitter page, which is at BP Global PR on Twitter. And someone asked me about the legalities of this. It is a parody page that uses as its photo on Twitter the BP logo, but made in black and white and with little drips of oil coming off of it. And it's quite fun to follow along with as they, lampoon what BP might be saying in response to all the developments that are going on with the oil spill. And the question about its legality, I looked at this and said, I can't really imagine any more clear-cut instance of fair use, to the extent there is such a thing. We always talk about how fair use is so difficult to pin down and say that is certainly fair use, and I would hesitate to say that about anything. But this one looks pretty darn clear. Have you guys checked it out? And do you agree?
I mean, it definitely seems like a pretty clear case of parody. But I mean, the more interesting question is, would BP be so stupid effectively to go after it? Because all it would do is, I mean, the backlash to going after something like that would be tremendous.
That's right. From the man who coined the term Streisand effect, by the way.
That's right. And I mean, even with BP certainly has plenty of bad press right now. I don't think they need to add any more to it. And even if you think comparatively, bad press about giant oil spill and destroying the Gulf versus bad press about getting pissed off about a fake Twitter person, I don't think that there's any any good reason for them to actually respond to it legally. It would just be idiotic.
Mm-hmm. And this is one of those things where we may not even have to get to the fair use question. And in fact, I might, if I were called upon to defend BP, BP Global PR in this, this might be the approach that I would take. When you're arguing fair use, you're raising an affirmative defense, and when you're raising an affirmative defense, you're saying, yeah, this is an infringement, but it's okay because it's a fair use. So I think this is one of those situations where it's not even, you wouldn't even have to concede that it's an infringement, because remember, the hallmark or the touchstone of trademark infringement is that there's a likelihood of confusion, and no reasonable person, even a moron in a hurry, would not think that this is actually British Petroleum behind this. So there's that, and it might be good to go down that route, because that way you don't have to get to the fair use analysis. Because if there's any problematic aspect of the fair use defense on this, is that they're using the actual logo, even though it's mired a little bit by some oil there, smudged, and it's in black and white. One of the things, when you're raising a trademark fair use defense, is that you're only using enough of the other of the plaintiff's mark that's necessary to convey your idea. So usually when you're using another company's logo, your fair use defense is much weaker. So it'd be nice to not even have to go down the fair use route. On a related point, or on a kind of a different side of this, maybe the real smart one here, the real genius in all of this is British Petroleum, BP, for not raising a big fuss about this. Not only because of the obvious Streisand effect implications, wanting to avoid that wonderful Masnickian term, but also the fact that they realize this is going to go stale pretty quickly. This is just a meme, and who's going to find this relevant anymore once they finally stop the flow of oil gushing out there? Maybe funny for a day or two more after that, but this is just going to be one of those things where a year in review at the end of 2010 we'll think, aha, wasn't that a funny little episode back in the spring, early summer with BP Global PR. So it's one of those things where the fight would be over, even before a judge could rule on a preliminary injunction.
So a couple of other little bits of humor just to round out the show. Thanks to Evan, we now know that you can get married by a robot.
I think so.
If you're planning to do that, feel free. Actually, it's kind of interesting, the whole notion of maybe automating the marriage process underlying the story that you wrote about, Evan, I thought was kind of an interesting point. Anything you want to elaborate on there?
Just the fact that it would just, I'm sure, do a wonderful thing for enhancing the sanctity of that sacred relationship. The gist of it is, what is the importance? What is the legal importance? The legal requirements for there to be an officiant at a marriage ceremony. And this was all precipitated from a story they saw on Mashable, where that couple was married a couple weekends ago by a robot. The robot performed the ceremony. So I got to thinking, would that be a legal marriage here? And at least in Illinois, it looks like there are some ways, and I ought to say, this is not legal advice. Don't try this at home if you really want to be married. Maybe guys, if you don't like the girl, you could try this. But did I say that out loud?
Yes, you did. Vice versa, of course.
Right. You could kind of set it up so that the officiant isn't a required element. So go read it on Internet Cases. It's a fun little story.
Cool. And also, Mike, again, probably something on this on Tech Dirt already, but that Warner Brothers is getting sued for pirating its anti-piracy technology.
Yeah, that one that was a story from last week, I think. And it's kind of cute, this idea that they pirated. It is really, when you look at it, it's a patent case, and in some sense, it may even be. It borders on sort of a traditional sort of patent troll type case, but it does come off as just an amusing story that of all things that you might copy from someone, potentially, the idea of copying anti-piracy technology. So it's amusing, but when you actually look a little deeper at it, I think Warner Brothers might actually have a case here, in that they really were coming up with the same technology at about the same time. They both have patents on it, and amusingly, actually in the lawsuit filing, the company that was suing Warner Brothers, in referring to their own patent, actually used not the title of their own patent, but used the title of Warner Brothers patent, which suggested that they were even confused about who held which patent over this. So the whole case just kind of seems like a mess, but it's just kind of amusing in this idea. Whenever you see any of these companies that are really sort of really strong in the anti-piracy stance, and it happens pretty frequently, you find stories of them actually being involved in cases where they're accused of taking stuff as well. I mean, in fact, with all the stuff about Hurt Locker and the Hurt Locker lawsuit, the lawsuits, 5,000 of them today, Hurt Locker, the producers are being sued themselves for supposedly, copying that story or using somebody else's story as the basis of Hurt Locker. And so, you have these situations all the time where people who are, who act as if these questions are black and white questions of, well, you took or copied or stole is the verb that's used all the time, even if it's not accurate. They end up doing the same things sooner or later themselves, and it puts them in a position where they certainly look hypocritical, even as you get down a little deeper into the weeds.
So let's end things up by doing our resources of the week. I asked you guys to let us know which are your favorite sources as you're going out and finding out about technology, legal news. Mike, you want to give us something you would recommend?
Sure. There's so many, and I've actually found that there are a few really, really good Twitter accounts, and one that I've recommended to a whole bunch of people are the law professor Michael Scott has a few different Twitter accounts. One is copyright law. There's internet law. I think the last one might be privacy law. He has a few, and all three of them are just fantastic. I don't know how he does it. He finds so many different stories, and I've noticed that the more I follow his Twitter feed, the more stories I feel like I need to write up because he seems to find all the good ones.
Cool. I'm going to go follow those right now. Evan, any ideas from you?
I feel like I'm going old school on this because this guy has been around for so long. Doug Eisenberg down in Atlanta.
He's going to be on the show soon in June.
Oh, is that right? Great, because I was going to suggest him at gigalaw.com. And he's been doing this for years. I remember when I first got out of law school and started getting interested in all of this stuff way back in the year 2000, 2001. I remember reading gigalaw.com, before, I thought of it in terms of a blog. But he just has consistently done a great job of aggregating stories that deal with the law and the internet. And he's got a couple of Twitter feeds that go along with that. So gigalaw.com is my recommendation because I go there a lot to find out a lot of interesting and new stories. That's where I first heard about the Facebook conviction, the mom convicted for harassing her son, this Facebook account, for example.
Great. Those are both excellent recommendations. I, of course, would recommend both of your blogs, internetcases.com and techdirt.com, which I read all the time. In addition to, I've been reading a couple of blogs at Wired that are quite excellent. Threat Level covers all things legal and security and privacy related. And Epicenter seems to be real active these days, and they cover a whole slew of things. So those are over at wired.com. And Cory actually, as we were getting ready for the show, sent in one as well. And after I sent my email around asking for this, Cory emailed back, "I like lowering the bar." And I had to think about that and go, gee, that doesn't make too much sense. Cory generally raises the bar whenever he's involved. And then I finally Googled it and realized that it was something I hadn't seen before. There's a legal humor site called Lowering the Bar at loweringthebar.net. So there's one for you to check out. Thanks to Cory. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up TWiL 62 here. Mike Masnick, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. I hope we can have you back again sometime.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Folks can find Mike, of course, at techdirt.com, at mmasnick on Twitter, and also at techdirt on Twitter. So have a great week. We'll chat with you soon, I hope.
Sure. Thanks.
All right. And Evan, thank you so much for joining us once again and all your insights.
Well, thanks for having me. And I will always remember where I was and what I was doing when I learned that Gary Coleman died at the age of 42.
Yes. The chat room has been abuzz with that.
Yes. So nice to talk with you, Mike. I've been looking forward to it, and it was a great time.
Yeah, great to chat with you as well.
Great. So follow Evan on Twitter, folks, at Internet Cases, and his blog is internetcases.com. Thanks so much, everyone, and we will see you next week.